our Youth Council members who came back for a second session. Great to have you back. So I'd like to bring back this meeting. We met this afternoon. Councillors, I'll just check with you. As you know, we have 3 variance hearings and 3 statutory public hearings this evening. Is there any disclosure of interest from any of the councillors on any of the items? Okay, seeing none, I'll just check with staff. I know that we were given some additional information. Is there any change to the agenda from staff?
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have an additional item under 21.3, which has been distributed to Council.
Thank you very much. Okay, so our first hearing is a development variance permit application number VP 489. I'll just read out an opening statement. We'll get a mover and seconder, have the director tell us about the item, and then we'll have public input. So I would like to open up the hearings for VP 489, 490, and 504. Following the reading of the motion, I will request the Director of Development Services to explain the development. I will then ask 3 times for submissions from the gallery, giving the opportunity for the applicant and the public to speak. Council will also have the opportunity to ask questions. Once this is complete, I will close the hearing and Council will vote on that motion. Council, there's a motion in front of you on this variance. Is there a mover and seconder? Councillor Cannon, Councillor Eliason, thank you. Director of Development Services.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 21.1 is a development variance permit application, VP 489, and the motion is that it be authorized for issuance for Lot 6, Plan EPP 79116, to vary zoning bylaw number 2303 by increasing the maximum permitted combined height of a retaining wall and fence from 2 meters to 5 meters. For the property located at 7924th Street Northeast, and the company's name is 2321 Okanagan Holdings Limited, represented by Mark Wilson. The staff report is in your agenda, and we talked about this at the Planning Committee meeting last week. This is the final phase of the Maplewood subdivision. This air photo was taken in 2016. These trees are now gone, and most of the land here has been built out with single family.
Director, can you put that up on our screen?
Oh, it's on my screen, but there we go.
Thank you very much. Continue.
So there's a single family dwelling on the property, and a retaining wall was constructed last year in 2018, and the building permit specified that the wall would be 2 meters in height, could only be 2 meters in height, and in the end it was built to 5 meters in height, measured from the original grade before the lot was filled. So the applicant applied for a variance, and it is in front of you tonight.
Great, thank you very much. And I see Mr. Wilson's in the gallery. Mr. Wilson, did you wish to address council or add anything to the director's report? Not at this time? Okay. I'll ask them from the public. If there is any member of the public who wishes to speak to us about this variance, I'll ask for a first time. Asking for a second time. Councillors, do you have any questions you'd like to ask around this variance? If you do, if Mr. Wilson, now would be the time. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Wilson mentioned before, really the only impacted neighbor is the Bonners, is that correct? Okay, and we have correspondence from them saying they don't have an issue, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other questions from council? I'll ask for a third and final time if there's any input from the public. Seeing none, I'll close this variance hearing. We'll put the motion back up on the screen. Council, any discussion over this motion? I see no discussion. I will call the question then. All those in favor? Is there any opposed? is carried unanimously. We'll go on to 21.2, Development Variance Permit Application Number VP 490, 71 24th Street Northeast, retaining wall and fence. We have a proposed motion on the screen. Could I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Councillor Cannon, thank you. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to address this one.
Variance application number 490 proposes to increase the height of a retaining wall from 2 meters to 3.8 meters for the property located at 71 24th Street Northeast. The owner is, the applicant is 2321 Okanagan Holdings Limited, represented by Mark Wilson, same as the previous variance reviewed. This lot is 2 lots directly to the north of the other property that was just looked at, and it also has a retaining wall in the rear yard that's over height by about 1.8 meters in height. The grade slopes down from Okanagan Avenue down towards 24th Street. So the variance on this wall is not quite as pronounced as the previous wall looked at. There's a lot in the middle between the subject property and the previous one looked at. They're narrow, relatively narrow lots, and Mr. Wilson has consulted with the neighbor of the large property to the west. That neighbor does not have any objections to this wall, and I think there was some cooperation between the neighbor and the builder during the construction of this wall so that the wall could actually be built. And I think some additional landscaping and wall construction on the neighboring property was negotiated with that.
Great, thank you very much. Again, I'll ask 3 times starting. Mr. Wilson, do you wish to add anything to this variance application? Not at this time. I'll ask for members of the public. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak to this variance? I'll ask for a second time. Any member of council have any questions for Mr. Wilson at this time? Seeing none, I'll ask a third and final time if there's any member of the public who wishes to speak to this variance. Seeing none, I'll close this variance hearing. Go back to the motion on the screen for council to consider. Council, do you have any comments or questions around this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. We'll move on to 21.3, Development Variance Permit Application Number VP 504, 1441 20th Avenue Southeast. We have a proposed motion on the screen. Can I have a mover and seconder to get it on the floor? Councillor Flynn, Councillor Lavery. Thank you. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the variance request.
This application is a development variance application VP 504 for the property at 1441 20th Avenue Southeast. The owner of the property is a numbered company represented by Franklin Engineering Limited as the agent. It involves a related subdivision application, and the variances have to do with off-site servicing. The first request is to vary the servicing bylaw by reducing the standard along 20th Avenue Southeast, the RD3 standard, and in lieu of constructing the frontage to that RD3 standard, the applicant would provide the city with a cash in lieu for a 2-meter wide strip of asphalt paving for the bike lane component of the cross-section of the street, which I can show you what that looks like in a minute, and also to waive the requirement to provide street lighting. The second variance has to do with utilities, storm sewer, and the request is to waive the requirement to extend the city's sanitary storm main along the northern portion of the property from the west property line to the east property line. Just have some diagrams here. When I talk about the RD3 standard, that's the collector standard. 20th Avenue Southeast is a collector street. And that standard has a boulevard, street light, sidewalk, street light, boulevard, curb, gutter, and then a bike lane before the road pavement starts. So we don't have that constructed anywhere along 20th Avenue Southeast at the moment. When you look west of that property towards the new subdivision Buyers View, you don't see that standard either. You see the local urban road standard there with the sidewalk right up to the curb and the street rather than a separated sidewalk. And that is because our servicing bylaw changed in 2016, right after that frontage was constructed. So we now have a different standard in our bylaw for a collector. And staff support what is being requested along 20th Avenue to some extent, but we do not support the waiving of the street light. And as far as the storm sewer main goes, we do not support that either.
Can you show us a map of the storm sewer?
Right now, the storm sewer goes, so this is the property under application. This is the northern portion of the property, and the storm sewer comes right up to the west property boundary in a right-of-way. And there's a right-of-way registered along the subject property in the northern portion. And that right-of-way was registered on the property in 2005. There's also a sanitary main that runs parallel to the storm main up to the western boundary.
Great, thank you very much. Is there anything else you wish to add?
Not at this time.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we will start by asking the applicant, either Mr. Raspberry or Mr. Wickner, if you would like to come forward and add anything that the director has said. Please come forward.
Thank you. Jason Wickner here from Franklin Engineering. So since meeting in the last time, we are proposing the RD3 standard requires a davit arm streetlight out front, which is 9 meters high, and the power lines are at 9 meters for that section. So we're proposing to do a post-op streetlight instead, which is only 5 meters high, and that gets our clearance of its 3 meters minimum clearance under those power lines. So we're proposing to do one post-op streetlight like this one on your screen there. That will be right at the entrance to the property. And I have a sketch of where that would end up. I thought that would be distributed, but it does not appear to.
We do have some.
You have something there. So on the last page of that, you'll see the post-op streetlight labeled at the entrance to the property.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then furthermore to the second part of the application, we did a perk test, and I have the results that have also been distributed, which show exactly the what we were anticipating in that area, with our preliminary rate being very close to what we found when we tested. We also did a second test just to confirm, which was actually much faster by a factor of almost 3. So we think it is actually over engineering to use that first test. The first test, the hole was sloughing in quite a bit, and it was really hard to get a good test. So we used a liner for the second one to get more accurate.
Thank you. I'll just see if council has any questions before we ask you to sit down. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Wickner at this time? Councillor Flynn.
Well, I'm a numbers guy and I really like all these numbers, but I have no idea what they mean.
Yeah.
So effectively, maybe I'll try to summarize what I think they mean. The first test you did would meet standards for on-site storm, and the second test is even better.
Correct.
Okay, and I'll wait to, well, maybe while you're here, I'll ask staff if they come to the same summary from these numbers, because clearly I am not a soils engineer.
Councillor Flynn, can we just hold that question?
Okay.
Until we finish the public piece, and then before we close the hearing, we'll ask it, and then other public may wish to come forward. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Wickner at this time? Okay, thank you very much. So my question to you then is that you're willing to put the sidewalk in that jives with the other sidewalks that are there presently, and you're willing to put a street light up a freestanding one like we see there, but you're asking to have the variance for the storm across the property.
Correct.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask for members of the public. If there are members of the public that wish to come forward and speak to us about this variance, I'll ask for a first time. Please come forward.
Thank you. My name is Susan Housden, and I live at 1970 13th Street Southeast with my husband Brad and my two sons Cashton and Jonah, who are here tonight. Our backyard faces the development, and I do have some opinions on this matter and questions too. So first of all, I wonder, why am I being informed about this variance permit hearing? What concerns should I have? Why these changes? Why not extend the storm sewer? Why is the developer requesting this? Does this mean then that the new lots, I'm assuming, won't be hooked up to the city storm sewer? Has this happened before in Salmon Arm in an entire subdivision? From the research that I've done in the limited time that I've had, I've learned that typical alternative drainage systems, like for example French drain systems that have been approved by engineers, typically last for say 10 years, give or take, at which time typically they'll become clogged with silt or clay, and that can cause a problem clearly. So I'm wondering who's responsible for water damage in such cases. And as some of us know with firsthand knowledge, insurance companies often don't cover water damage. As city councillors, are you concerned about liability? I received this letter exactly a week ago, and I'm just trying to understand it. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. And as you can see, I have a lot of questions. So I'm hoping that as council members, you do not adopt this motion. And if City Council is considering adopting the motion, I would like to say, at the very least, that the neighbors affected are granted more time to process answers to these questions and gather more information, learn from the information, and formulate, have the time to formulate a more informed response. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Housden, and we will be sure to ask staff those questions before this hearing closes, so that you'll hear the answers and can come forward if you have further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask for a second time if there are members of the public who wish to come forward to speak on this variance. Councillors, before I ask for a third time, if you have questions now of either of the presenters or of staff, now would be a good time to ask them. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Harrison. Actually, it's just a procedural question. Do we have the list of Ms. Housen's questions? Because if we close it and don't have that list, then
Thank you,
there
Councillor
may be,
Lavery.
I think there's a reference to perhaps others.
Sure,
other
and I'll be
questions
sure
as
not
well.
to close the hearing until Ms. Housden has an opportunity if she hasn't heard all the answers. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. So one question was, would the subdivision be connected to storm sewer, that would be a question we could,
So can we hear from the Director of Development Services or from the Director of Development Services? I think Ms. Houston was asking about this subdivision and about possible other subdivisions, probably whose choice it is, whether to hook up or not.
Your worship, I'll just start by, and Jen's going to help me answer some of these questions, the city engineer, but basically the servicing bylaw requires the storm main to be extended from this point here to the eastern parcel boundary along the right-of-way, and that is to give the adjacent property to the east potential to connect to the city storm sewer main. So what's being requested here is to not extend the storm main. There's also a on-site stormwater management plan that is in the process. It hasn't been fully reviewed yet by our city engineer and her staff. And some of the information supplied tonight refers to that. But what we are hearing is that the soils are most likely suitable for an on-site stormwater collection detention system. The soils are likely suitable for that, in which case connection to the storm main may not be required.
okay.
Now, if there is no connection to the city storm sewer, then a covenant is registered on this property on all the lots in the subdivision, saving the city harmless from liability.
And so the important part there is the variance actually is about whether the developer has to carry the storm sewer line across his property to the neighbor's property. That's the variance piece.
That's the variance.
Whose choice is it as to whether a developer, whether it's just one or another one, hooks up to the storm sewer or looks after their own stormwater on site? Who makes that choice?
Your worship, the new servicing bylaw has gone away from the older method of just putting the stormwater directly into the storm sewers and rushing it down to the lake to trying to best mimic the natural hydrology on any specific site. So it's ultimately my approval, but it's more Mother Nature's choice if you want to go there, that whatever was happening on the site before development is what we're trying to best achieve, of course, minus the trees.
So the city engineer takes the data and if the developer says, hey, I'd like to look after my stormwater on site, the engineering department looks at that, sees whether it's possible, and if it's possible, says, yes, you can.
Yes, Your Worship. So in this particular case with these soils up here, before any development touched it, a lot of water got into the ground because it's sand. It just naturally percolated. So that's what we would want to see happen to the best point possible.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lindgren.
Thank you. So I just have some questions about on-site water collection. Obviously, the piece of property as it exists now absorbs all the rainwater because it's all wide open space. But when you cover most of it with houses and paved driveways and a paved road, suddenly water will collect. So what happens to the water that lands on paved structures or houses? What kind of collection system is there?
Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Through your worship, what they're proposing in this particular case is that each individual parcel has their own rock pit. So each sort of house and lot will be draining to a rock pit which would infiltrate, and then the roads themselves are connected to a different infiltration basin for that particular road. So the amount of water that hits the site is still the same. It's just how quickly it gets to wherever it's going. And on a natural site, you'd have trees sort of taking some water away, evapotranspirating, etc. So you would be seeing, in this sort of case, a little bit more water getting into the ground. However, there's a lot of sites around it that have taken water away from the ground and put it straight into the storm sewers. So in this particular case, when I'm reviewing a site like this, I look at the overall hydrology of the area, and what I'm seeing is we've taken a ton of water out of the ground here. So this, in relation to that, is a very small amount of water. So as the way they're trying to distribute it along the lot is very good rather than point source. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Councillor Flynn.
So, back to my question.
Please.
When the consulting engineers have come up with their conclusion that the soils are suitable, you haven't made a decision yet because you have, if we approve the variance, which isn't whether or not they can go with regular storm, it's whether to put the line across to the other property, but the decision on whether or not to connect to the regular storm is yours to make, and you don't have enough information yet and aren't ready to make that decision. But what we're talking about tonight has nothing to do with that.
That's correct.
Okay, now back to, from the previous meeting, my question was, if we allow the variance and the soils don't come in as good with the neighboring property, then we have an issue. So what is, we didn't get reports from the neighboring property. Do we feel that it's going to be similar, not the same? Because that really is ultimately the issue with the variance.
As any good geotechnical engineer would tell you, soils can change from 1 centimeter to another on site. So I'm not qualified to make that call, and that's why our recommendation to council is to take that cash in lieu. Realistically, it's probably going to be fine, but I'm not 100% confident, so I wouldn't want to hang up the development next door on my 80% confidence level.
And then my question related to that, because I don't think we asked it at the previous meeting, is if we as council don't support the variance and support staff and asked for cash in lieu, and then 10 years down the road that other property develops and it's determined that it can have its storm collected the same way as this one, do we have the ability to give back that cash at that time?
Through your worship, yes.
Okay. And then a couple other questions with regards to liability. The city's held harmless, as Kevin said, but one of Ms. Housden's questions was about liability and maintenance. Are the individual property owners responsible for maintenance of their storm, and is the development or the strata responsible for the overall drainage?
Through your worship, the strata would be responsible. I'm not sure how they distribute that responsibility to each member of the strata. Ultimately, they're in charge of their infrastructure no matter what it is to maintain and change.
And the question was asked about other subdivisions. This type of flexibility is relatively new in our bylaw, or it's always been there?
Through your worship, the flexibility is new, but we used to have provisions for not extending storm sewer if it was over a certain distance away. So we have multiple subdivisions that were all rock pits, and we still do developments all over the place with rock pits. So infiltration of groundwater isn't new. Checking into it as much as we do now, as far as the percolation tests and making sure that soils are good and that they can drain within 48 hours, etc. That's all new. So I would say that we're more stringent in certain ways as far as checking to make sure it's going to work and be safe. But the flexibility for each subdivision is much greater to mimic that natural hydrology.
Okay, and then the last question I have is, there was talk at our other meeting, or the previous meeting, the council meeting, with regards to just the handling of stormwater nationally or internationally has become more reliant on ideas like this as opposed to throwing everything in our lake. Is that correct?
Through your worship, yes. Our new bylaw is based on the BC guidebook for stormwater regulations. A lot of municipalities have gone really far the other way. I was just reading Penticton now. You have to provide documentation why you're not putting it into the ground if you're not. So it's a way to minimize infrastructure that doesn't need to be used, but more importantly, it's helping recharge base flows to streams, groundwater levels for people on wells, etc. So it's definitely I think the more holistic approach.
Okay, well, thank you for all those answers, and Ms. Housden, thank you for all those questions, because they're very good questions.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Flynn covered the questions I was going to ask.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship, for a second opportunity. So if I understand correctly, no storm will be constructed on this site at this time. The question is whether or not we're asking for cash in lieu in case it would be required by the developer to the east at a later date.
That's correct.
Yes, okay.
Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just had a question in regards to the street lighting. Is it just one light that we were talking about or a few lights?
Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, first I'll just explain what is along the frontage right now. There's actually 6 ornamental street lights along 20th Avenue from the corner of 10th Street to approximately 13th Street, including a light just off the corner. And then there's 162 meters between 13th Street and 15th Street where there's no lights. So whether it's 1 light needed or 2, Jen can shed some light on that.
Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your Worship, the bylaw would require lighting to a certain light level for collector roads. It's my opinion at this point, due to the width of the frontage, it would more likely be 2 lights. So I believe that the applicant wants to put in 1 light, so it would be a variance from lighting the frontage at a certain light level down to just 1 street light, but it's a good question to clarify with the applicant if that's reasonable to do.
Okay, we will do that shortly.
I just had, and there's no, for lighting going down the road in the strata, would there be any lighting at this time? Is that something that we discuss, or?
Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, on site within the strata is really up to the consulting engineer to design something that's reasonable and safe. Sometimes in stratas you don't have post lighting. The units have lighting on the sides, and that's used for lighting. So it's internal, it's strata, it's not really up to us.
Okay.
Anything further, Councillor Cannon, at this time?
No, that's good.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, I need a little clarity on where we stand with the variance now, because the storm one, I think, is pretty clear. Staff wants cash in lieu. The developer doesn't want to pay cash in lieu. But you had mentioned and asked the applicant about the sidewalk, and the way I'm reading the variance is the sidewalk is already there. We're going to get cash in lieu to bring the sidewalk to the new standard in the future, is what we're asking for. Is that correct?
Yes, there's no sidewalk there presently, but the developer is willing to put the sidewalk in. And
No, there's a fully developed sidewalk.
Is there a sidewalk there?
Yeah.
Sorry. So maybe I better get staff to clarify
Yeah,
this.
thank you, 'cause
Make
you
sure we get it
confused
right.
me. Yeah.
Sorry. I was looking at the picture with the sidewalk, so.
Yeah.
Director of Development Services, could you just talk to us about that variance on the frontage?
Okay, Your Worship. So staff are fine with basically the design of the sidewalk and boulevard as exists now, which is the old standard. And the applicant is willing to give the city a cash in lieu contribution for the 2-meter wide asphalt bike lane,
When it happens.
which in the future could potentially go on the other side of the street. And so staff are fine with this alignment, not having a separated boulevard and an offset sidewalk. And that is where we're in agreement. I think I'm correct on that, but
So the sidewalk as is, because it's been constructed under the old standards, stays. Nobody disagrees with that. You'll have to work your entrance up on that sidewalk. You're not questioning cash in lieu for a future bike path, whether we put it on one side or the other, doesn't matter.
Councillor Flynn, you need to speak through
Oh,
me,
yeah,
and I will have him come up here.
And we have that, we will have that money. So really the variance is only whether it's 1, 2, or 0 lights for that piece. Is that correct?
And I think we heard from staff that their expectation was 2 lights, so 1 light would need a variance Is that correct? Okay.
And the developer has said he'll do one for sure, but it's a shorter one, but that's the only way it can work. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we'll ask him to come
Okay,
forward in a minute.
thanks.
Thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Cannon.
That's clear as mud to me yet, but I just wanted to. So in the motion that we're looking at for the variance permit, it's waiving the provision of a new sidewalk and a light standard. It just says light standard, so it's one. But what I heard from the applicant was they would be willing to do one. What I'm hearing from staff is that they'd like to see two. So if we go ahead with this motion, will we have to make an amendment there?
Director of Development Services, if council is willing to accept one light, would a variance, amendment to the variance be necessary?
If the applicant is willing to provide one light, I believe that goes back to their letter in the original staff report where they were going to give a cash contribution for one light. So if council, actually no, they don't want to give any money for any light. So I guess it depends what council wants. Does council want two lights or one? Staff are recommending two. The applicant is requesting to not give anything for a light.
They're willing to put one light in.
One light in, okay.
And one of the complicating factors is, now I remember why I made my sidewalk mistake, is because they have to take out part of the sidewalk and put a slet down in on the left-hand side as we look at this picture. And so that's why I would assume the street light's going to be put in the middle, because you can't put a street light in where the entrance is.
This is the, if I may, Your Worship, this is the motion that I wrote up earlier this afternoon. Staff recommends approval to waiving the requirement to upgrade the 20th Avenue Northeast, that should be southeast frontage to the full RD3 standard, subject to a cash in lieu contribution to be based on an engineer's opinion of probable cost, estimated at $4,600 for a 2-meter wide strip of asphalt for a future bicycle lane. Second bullet, off-site lighting installation to the local urban standard to match the newer street lighting along 20th Avenue Southeast in front of Byers View and to the satisfaction of the city engineer, and reinstatement of the curb, sidewalk, and boulevard to the existing local urban road standard.
Great, thank you, that's very clear. Councillor Cannon, do you wish to ask any further questions around that?
And then the second part of that is the storm water management further down. No, I'm good.
Great, thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Okay, thank you, Director of Development Services, for this. That makes it very clear. The only issue is, I'm hearing from the Director of Engineering and Public Works that the one light that the applicant is saying they will do may not be to the satisfaction of the city engineer. And with the wording of to the satisfaction of the city engineer, we may still be needing to talk about a variance of one light. So I just need clarification around that. Are we good that they're putting in one, or are we varying it to only allow one?
It's a good question. So would staff, if council accepts one light, would staff like an amendment to this motion?
Your worship, yes, please, because the bylaw says to a certain lighting level, so we would need you guys to reduce that service level to the one light.
Okay, thank you. I'm not saying council's going to do that, but at least we have all the options. Councillor Flynn, you have any other questions?
No, I guess my only question is, are we now dealing with this variance as opposed to the one that we've put on the floor? Because this one's clearer.
So how would the Director of Development Services like us to handle that?
Well, for number one and the 3 bullets, this is what staff is recommending. and also to include 2 street lights for clarification on that. On the second variance request, to waive the requirement to extend the storm sewer through the right-of-way, that is still on the floor as proposed by the applicant, and staff don't recommend that variance either.
Okay, thank you. So the motion that was moved and seconded is the variance as requested by the developer. So if council would like any changes to that, they would have to vary that motion.
Okay, and then second question is, can we split the 2 variances to vote on them separately?
Yes, we could, or we could handle them both together and just work through them and then vote on it.
Well, I will make a motion to amend.
Okay, right now, we're still in the,
Okay,
in a
sorry,
public
my
hearing,
bad.
but once that's closed, then we can do that. Okay,
Hold on.
any other questions, Councillor Flynn?
Did we answer all of?
We're going
Ms.
to ask
Hausman's
the developer to come forward here in a minute, but, would you like to come back up, Jason, just so we can make sure we clarify, and then we'll give Ms. Hausen an opportunity as well? I haven't asked for a third time yet. So we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and understanding. You're willing to put in a street light in the front of your property. It would still need a variance to meet the standard. So you understand that?
That is correct, yes. So to meet RD3 standard, it would be a davit arm light, 9 meters high, and that would meet the lighting levels for that the entire frontage. But because we're going to a single post top light, then that doesn't quite meet it on the edge. Now it's a little tricky because at the spacing, you wouldn't hit the spacing before the end of the property, but you would lose your light levels before the end of the property.
Okay, great. Understand that. The second is you're willing to put in a cash in lieu for the future asphalt bike lane?
Correct, yes. So keeping with the city staff's plan to do in the future, they would offset the center line from the crown on the road and extend it to the south, adding bike lanes to both sides of the road.
Okay. Council, do you have any other questions for the engineer before we give Ms. Howson a chance to make sure that we're clear on things? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship. And given no variance on the lighting, where would 2 lights go?
That's a good question, because if we're keeping within our frontage, we wouldn't be able to put one on the left-hand side of the property. So we would have one where I proposed on the right side of the entrance. The entrance goes right on the left side of that property. So on your sketches there, you can see that. And then we'd have to put one on the far right-hand side of the property as well.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillors, any other questions? Thank you very much for answering our questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Houston, did you have any follow-up questions? Please come forward.
So I'm just wondering if there would be a variance, like another hearing at the stage where it's determined about the connecting to the city storm sewer, or if that's something that wouldn't be brought to me, for example, in the way that this was.
Yeah, so that's outside the jurisdiction of the council.
Okay.
That's a staff decision based on, on the city engineer.
Okay, and then my final sort of overall question, which I opened up with, is should I be concerned? Like, should my neighbors be concerned? What concerns might you say I'd want to be thinking of? It's very general, but it's very real too.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yeah.
and I'll see if council would like to address that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lindgren.
Sorry, I got wrapped up in the new question. I was just wondering what the spacing is on the light standards that exist in front of Buyers View. How far apart are they?
Good question.
Your Worship, I'm estimating they're about 40 meters apart.
Okay, and how wide is this property?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Director of Engineering and Public Works?
Your worship, it's, the frontage is about 33 meters wide. In general, our decorative lighting is less than 30 meter spacing, and we've actually, it's now LED, standard as opposed to, Buyer's View, which came in under the old, so it was HPS.
Right. Okay, and is there some sort of provision for, I know there's two developments that are there already. They have not provided lighting along 20th, correct?
There is street lighting along here. There's-
Between 13th and the property that we're talking about tonight.
Oh, right here?
Yeah. And then on the 15th Street and the neighboring property, yeah, where you are.
Your worship, there's no, okay, there's a light here
Yeah,
and there's a light here.
okay,
So there's 162 meters where there's no lighting.
okay. And so have our expectations changed since those subdivisions were put in, or why were they not required to put lighting along the frontage? I'm just trying to figure out, I think, that if we put lights in front of this property, will there be some opportunity in the future for matching lights or more lighting provided by either developers? It doesn't look like developers are going to do it now because they've already built, or is the city going to fill in the gaps that are missing, or how does that work?
Director of Engineering and Public Works?
Your worship, this being a collector road, previously they were funded under DCC funds. So we would collect the DCCs and then the city would in theory upgrade the roadway. So that is likely why it was not provided at the time of those subdivisions, as they're older. Unless they developed, they would not be filling in the gaps. So the city would at this point have to come in and do that.
So would that be something that's on the city's radar going forward, that these are areas that are no longer, or that there's no longer an opportunity for somebody else to do the lighting, and do we have it on our radar to do it ourselves?
Through your worship, we have not really had street lighting infill on our radar except through that annual outreach to the public to find out areas of low lighting and concerns. So if this came up, we would definitely consider it being with sidewalk and pedestrians.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindgren. Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, one more question, or two more to staff with regards to the stormwater, because I think I'm pretty comfortable with the lighting issue. Is it typical that, or could the consultant or consulting engineer not have asked the neighbor to do some soil tests on his property, just in case at some point in the future he develops, or is that not something typical that we do? Because then we'd have certainty around their percolation rates, and that would kind of support what you're doing. I don't know if that's normal, it's private property. I know who owns it, but they might say no.
My understanding, Councillor Flynn, was that we heard at the planning meeting that the neighbor did not want percolation tests.
Okay, I didn't know that. And then that right-of-way on the right side of the neighbor's property that's shown in green, what is that a right-of-way for? Yeah, right there.
Director of Engineering and Public Works?
I believe that that's the sanitary service to that property, but I'm not confident, so.
But there's no storm access through that?
I do not believe so.
Okay. Thank you. I think I have asked as many questions as anybody could possibly want me to ask, so I'm done.
I really appreciate it too, Councillor Flynn. Thank you. Councillor Cannon?
I have a couple more questions. So on the property that we're talking about, where the green areas there, that's a registered easement, right? For the pipes to go there in future if they need be. But just on the other side of it is where the retention, the on-site stormwater would go, right?
Director of Engineering and Public Works, I believe you said each strata would have their own, but I'll let you answer the question.
Your worship, you're correct. So each lot will have its own rock pit as proposed right now, and then the road itself has an infiltration system. On the drawings that were circulated to you, you can actually see it. That's probably the easiest way to show that. It's about halfway north-south on the property.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Councillor Lindgren.
Thank you, Your Worship. Couple questions about the grade here. Between 13th and 15th Streets, is that all flat, same grade? Okay. And so the opportunity for water to be running downhill into somebody else's yard is not really there. And did I understand the layout would be that the driveway or the roadway into the strata would run up the left side, so it would be the west side of the property?
That's correct.
And the houses will then, their backyards will back onto this undeveloped property to the east? Have you got that map? All right. Right, okay. So the people sitting here in the gallery live on the other side of the road that will access the strata. And the rock pits would be in the back or the front of the new properties? Or does it matter?
Director of Engineering and Public Works.
Your Worship, I'm not sure we know that at this time. It's usually during building permit that they decide where it's gonna be.
Okay. Do they normally sort of make them uniform all the way down the road, or do they stagger them to sort of distribute water more evenly? Or is that?
It would be hard to say what's normal with each strata or each development is gonna be different. So
Okay.
I would expect being strata, they'd be similar, but.
Okay.
That's,
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. So my question is about the property to the west. Are there any residences currently connected to that storm that's in there?
Your Worship, I'm guessing fairly confidently that all these properties are connected to this storm sewer main that runs along 13th Street.
Okay, and at the time a choice was made to move stormwater that way rather than the way that this developer is interested in?
That's correct, because this subdivision here preceded the bylaw in effect today.
So either way, there will be a stormwater management system, either a pipe or a natural pit format. I just want to make it clear that it's not like anybody's getting a free pass on work. Am I understanding that right?
They have to manage their stormwater.
Yes.
Either on site or through
Okay,
pipe.
all right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. So our public hearing is still open, and I've asked 2 times. I'm going to ask a 3rd and final time if there's any others who would like to come forward to make any further presentation on this variance. Okay, seeing none, I will close the hearing. We'll put the motion that was made up on the screen. Just so council's clear that if we pass that motion, we would be approving the variances as requested. That, as stated there, is the staff recommendation. Guess there's no way to get both those on the screen at the same time, huh? I think we better go back to the motion that has been made. Thank you. I'll open up to council. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, I'd like to get started by making an amendment to the motion to have it read like the staff recommendation, or the newly worded staff recommendation, if I could.
Thank you. Then we can go to that. So, Councillor Flynn, that would mean the change would be to number 1.
To read like it does, but a further amendment to say 1 street light as opposed to the satisfaction of the city engineer.
Okay, thank you. So the amendment would be as is read there, with the second bullet saying the installation of 1 light and removing to the satisfaction of the city engineer.
Correct.
Okay, is there a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Wallace Richmond, thank you. Speaking to the amendment, Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, it's kind of speaking to the amendment and the whole situation in general. I think this is perfect development, flat land, infill. I mean, we talked about all that at the public hearing for zoning and all of that. So, and I want to make it be a win-win. And to me, the developer is not being unreasonable. They're giving us cash in lieu for the new standards for collector roads with regards to bike path. They're going to bring the sidewalk back to standards once they put their road in. They are putting in one light, and because of the width of the property and the fact that we have LED lights now, I think we may be okay with one light. And if we aren't, I guess we'll have to deal with that on the other corner, but I'm okay with going 50-50 on the lighting. I was originally in favor of not taking any money for the storm management, but because we don't know the percolation rates of this property beside, and knowing that cash can come back to the developer if it isn't needed to be connected to storm, which is probably what's going to happen, but I think we're better off there to err on the side of caution. So I think,
Okay, your amendment does not say that,
oh, sorry.
not yet.
No, the amendment, I'm not in, sorry, you're right. There says waive that requirement. My bad. That's why I'm so confused and wanted to split it. Okay.
It's okay, because this amendment we can go with, and if someone wishes to make a second amendment, that's fine.
So my amendment is more related to the first piece that was confusing,
Understood?
and I will not amend the second at this time. I'll wait to hear what others have to say.
Okay, do you wish to speak to that, any further to the amendments to number
No,
one?
now that I've already confused everybody, I apologize.
No, we understand. Councillor Cannon?
Yeah, I'm really confused. So we don't have in here in the amendment that I seconded, to take the stormwater management, money in lieu. That's not in here,
That
right?
could be a second amendment that comes later. This is just amending number one.
Okay. So could I make that second amendment now?
No,
No, not yet.
have
So
to do
I
this
will
one first.
speak to the first amendment
thank you,
that I
Councillor Cannon.
seconded. I am fine also with only one street light because of the width of the property. And I think it's a good option rather than put two for that width of the property. It kind of goes with the subdivisions leading up to it. I was actually up there tonight checking it out again. So I think one's a good number to go with rather than two street lights at the end.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Any further councillors wish to speak to this amendment? Staff understanding the amendment as stated?
Your worship, I just want to clarify that what council is doing is amending the original motion to number one, indicated in the page that Kevin has displayed.
That's
And
right.
then you're going to deal with number two separately as another amendment?
If an amendment comes forward, yes.
Okay,
Just to be
Thank
clear,
you.
number one, we're doing one light, not to the satisfaction of the engineer.
So clarifying bullet number, the second bullet there, we changed the wording there to say that one light, off-site lighting installation, to include one light. So that bullet is not exactly the same. Is that understood?
I understand.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just want to make sure Director of Engineering and Public Works understands what we're doing here. Okay, thank you. Any other speakers to this amendment? Councillor Cannon?
Were we also taking out satisfaction of city engineer?
Yes.
So that needs to go too.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking to the amendment, Councillor Lindgren.
Thanks. I'm hesitant to take out the last piece. I'm happy with one light, but I think that that light needs to be meeting a standard of some sort, and currently it's meeting a standard that's assessed by the city engineer. And if we take that piece out, I believe the city will lose some control over what actually happens with that light standard. And I think that that's an important piece that we need to maintain control of. So it's up to the the mover and seconder, of course, but I would recommend that we add the word one light, but leave in this last phrase.
The challenge with leaving in the, meeting the lighting standards of city engineer is that one light will not meet that standard because it's lower. So you can't put both of those things in there.
Okay.
Do you understand, Councillor?
I do, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, Councillor Lavery.
I was going to make the same point that Councillor Lindgren made, and it seems to me that we are saying install one light, and that would take precedence as long as that one light meets the approval of the city engineer. So I don't, my thinking is along the same lines as Councillor Lindgren's. I don't see one precluding the other.
Could we just ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works to clarify that?
Your worship, I'm actually fine with it because it does say to the local urban standard, which is our LED residential lights. So it will hold them to the specification that we've agreed upon in this meeting.
So you're okay with your name not being on there?
It's hard to satisfy me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Flynn.
I was just gonna say, I think the words local urban standard dealt with what the two councillors were concerned with, so.
Okay, we're good. Councillor Cannon?
So does the local urban standard, will it be the decorative ones like we see in fires here? Like that type of light standard?
Through your worship, yes.
We took out that was in the, okay, just wanted to double check.
No, it's good to make sure that we're clear. Councillors, do you have any other further questions regarding the amendment, the first amendment? Okay, I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Okay, the amendment passes unanimously. Is there any further discussion before we move forward? Councillor Cannon,
I was gonna move forward to number 2.
please do.
So I would like to make an amendment that we take the cash in lieu. And the reason, oh, I guess I need it.
Is there a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Flynn,
Can I speak to the amendment?
please.
So I think it's important to have the continuity of that money there in case the property beside, when they do and if they ever develop, have the option to either do their stormwater on site or hook up to that. And I think hearing from staff that if the property next did develop and decided to do the stormwater on site, then the developer that we're taking this money in cash in lieu, we could refund. So I think that makes it something I could support.
Thank you. The amount is $11,290, is that correct? That's the cash in lieu amount?
Your worship, I believe that's the estimate that's provided from Franklin. We would want to double check that amount and make sure that the contingency is added in engineering kind of thing. So it may be already, but we would just like to keep the wording that to the engineer's estimate. Okay,
fair enough. Councillor Cannon, you're comfortable with that? Okay. Other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I support Councillor Cannon's amendment. I think that just in terms of general comment, on-site stormwater management works, it's proven, and is best practice. And I think that's what we're finding. And it needs to be signed off by an engineer. Now, I know that saves the city harmless from future liability, but it does work and it's in place, and I agree with that when it's signed off. I agree with Councillor Cannon's comments as well. My thoughts all along were that, again, we don't know the percolation of that eastern portion, and even if it was fine, it's actually up to the right of that developer to do, that applicant to do stormwater management in the way they best perceive. Perhaps it was me, I would do percolation, but if we don't do the in lieu, that encumbers that owner on the property to the east and limits their options. And I think that it's in a procedural way, in a fairness way, in a not having the impact of one applicant affect the other. It's, in my view, the only way to go to accept that cash in lieu.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Any further councillors wish to speak to this amendment? Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. With respect to my colleagues, I won't be supporting this amendment. I feel like we're asking the developer to pay twice, so.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, there was an amendment at the council meeting, I believe, or an attempt at amendment, and I did not support it. I've since thought about this. I hate to hold up somebody's money, but that's part of being a developer. I think this is a good development, and I think that money will come back to the developer, but I have come around to the thinking of Councillor Lavery and Councillor Cannon that if we don't take the money now and at least have it in lieu in case that has to be extended from where the previous developer extended it, it's going to fall back on the taxpayers if it has to happen, and I don't think that's the right way to do it. So I support the amendment.
Thank you. Any other discussion around the amendment? I see no further speakers, so I'll call a question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? All opposed? Councillor Wallace-Richmond opposed. The amendment carries. Okay. Can we just get that amendment put into that second section? And then we'll have the motion as amended. I think the Director of Engineering, your wording was, could you just give us that wording again?
Your Worship, it's actually in the first bullet of number 1 that it can be mimicked. So a cash in lieu contribution to be based on the engineer's opinion and probable cost, estimated at would be the, however much that was, $11,290.
Okay, I think we're just having a technical difficulty, that's all.
So the amendment is to waive to support waiving the requirement for the extension of the storm sewer main.
No, the amendment is a cash in lieu contribution to be based on the engineer's opinion of probable cost for the stormwater management or for the storm system.
Yeah, so Your Worship, if I may, and Jen just confirmed this with me, it wouldn't be a variance anymore. If council defeats this, then the bylaw kicks in.
Got it.
And there's no variance.
Got it. So really what we need to do is just take that out.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to make sure we do this right. I would accept an amendment from a councillor to remove section 2. Councillor Cannon, Councillor Flynn. The intention's the same, but I think we want to make this as clean as possible. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. I'm all about making it as clean as possible. Do we have to reference cash in lieu, or is that something that then becomes a decision of staff?
Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, no. You don't have to reference cash in lieu.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lavery, do you want to follow up at all? That's okay. Councillor Flynn.
My question was the same. Staff
Said we revert to the bylaw, so staff can take cash in lieu instead of actually having the main or the line done. And so okay, I'm comfortable then removing it.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion around that amendment? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Councillor Lavery, were you ready? We're removing number 2, which has the same effect as the other amendment, but it's actually the other amendment wasn't as clean. So I'll ask the question one more time. I want to give everybody a chance. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Your Worship, I understand why number 2 is no longer, the amendment took care of item 2. However, we voted on an amended, on an amendment to a motion. We didn't actually vote on the motion. So that's what we're doing now.
No, this is a third amendment.
Okay.
The third amendment is to take out that section 2 altogether,
Okay.
because what it does is it
Yes.
gives staff, then staff can make the decision on which type of system the person should use, and whether they will take cash in lieu or have the pipe run across.
Thanks, Your Worship.
Okay? Any other comments or questions? Councillor Flynn?
So now you just said that it will be up to staff whether they take cash in lieu or have the pipe run across. My whole intent was cash in lieu only, because I think in the future we won't need the pipe run across. So how do we deal with that?
Okay, I may have been wrong. Let's check.
Your worship, we
Director
are
of
going to
Council.
take cash in lieu.
You will take cash in lieu?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, assuming the perk tests are good for, yeah, okay, I get it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments before we ask the question? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond, opposed. Now we will vote on the motion as amended. We'll get rid of section 2 there. This is the motion as amended. I'll open it up to comments from councillors. Councillor Wallace Richmond.
Thanks, Your Worship. While I support this amendment on principle, I feel that the property to the west was developed at a different time under a different standard. We have heard from the engineer that dealing with your stormwater on site is the ideal that we seek, and either way, this developer has to deal with that water. I know it's no longer in the question, but I don't think that we can ask people to have to pay twice to do the same work because we don't know what's going on to the east. So for that reason, I'll be voting against this.
Thank you. Other speakers to the motion. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. I will vote in favor of the amended motion, and I just want to provide what I think is how I understand it. The developer isn't paying twice to handle stormwater on their property. They're giving us cash in lieu in case that has to be extended for the other property to develop sometime in the future, and if it doesn't have to be, they get the cash back. So in my mind, they're not paying twice. I was going to support that before, but after a week to think about it and understand they could get the cash back, I think we have to ask them to give us cash in lieu, and it's not paying twice in my mind.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Further speakers to the motion? Okay, just before I call a question, I'll just speak to the motion. First of all, I'd like to thank the developer for for coming back after planning with response, especially to the lighting. And I think it's a very reasonable response, that there be one street light out in front of your development. I think that's very adequate, and it'll make things safe, and so appreciate your work there. Similarly, the contribution for the strip of asphalt for future bike lane, I think we know that it's going to be a long ways off, and so appreciate you being willing to make that contribution. As far as the contribution to the storm pipe across the property, I agree with Councillor Flynn, and I think it's not just about this particular situation, but it could be about any subdivision in the city. I don't think the city can assume that the neighboring property is not going to need that storm. And if we can just go to the map that shows that piece, I think that one does. Yeah, so I don't think we can assume, and it could be this property, it could be any other property in the city. If we do not ask for cash in lieu, and it turns out that for some reason they do need the storm, then taxpayers will have to pay for that section. If when that property is developed, it turns out that yes, percolation is there, and yes, that's how they choose to look after the stormwater, then your monies will be refunded. And I think that's the safe way for the city to treat it. Similar to Councillor Flynn, I don't see it as paying twice necessarily. As far as Ms. Houston and her question goes, what do I have to be worried about? Which is a really good question. I think I feel similarly to Councillor Lavery in that the professionals, and I have trust in our engineering department, and they will make a decision based on whether the percolation will work or not. And as you've heard, it is becoming a more common way to deal with stormwater. And environmentally, it probably is better that we don't pipe things straight into the lake. So I do appreciate the question. Okay, councillors, any other comments before I ask the question on the motion? All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Wallace Richmond opposed. Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors and staff, for all of your input. Thank you to people who presented. We will now move to our next section, which is the rezoning section. Thank you. So our statutory public hearings, we have 3 of them. I'll just read a section first, and then we will open up our hearings. At this public hearing, anyone who believes their interest in property is affected by these matters will be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions to council. We have 3 public hearings: bylaws 4345, 4347, 4351, and 4355, which together. If you wish to speak concerning the proposed bylaws, please approach council and begin your presentation by clearly stating your name and residential address. The function of council this evening is to receive the view of the public and ask questions regarding submissions. Council will not debate the merit of these proposals with individuals. Background documentation related to the bylaws and written submissions that have been received by the city are available for inspection by the public and are located in the binders on the table by the entry doors. All written submissions will be retained by the corporate officer for review by council and by members of the public. To ensure everyone a reasonable opportunity to be heard, the following rules of procedure have been established. Please direct all submissions to the chair. I will then redirect questions to the correct staff person. Following introduction of the bylaws by city staff, the floor will be open for presentations, starting with the applicant and followed by other interested parties in the order in which the chair recognizes them. Presentations will not be limited unless the submission is not relevant to the proposed bylaw. There will be 3 calls for submissions prior to the closing of this public hearing. I ask that everyone respect the view of others and try to keep presentations as concise as possible. Legislation does not permit council to hear or receive submissions from the public after this hearing is closed. I would now ask the Director of Development Services to explain the first proposal.
Your Worship, the first bylaw, number 4345, is a proposed amendment to the official community plan for Lot 2, Plan 28506, civic address 130 Shuswap Street, Southwest. And the proposed official community plan amendment is to redesignate Lot 2 from institutional to high-density residential land use category.
Thank you. And following this is the zoning hearing, which is also related. So any speakers who wish to speak to both together would be welcome. So I'll start by asking Mr. Muto or a representative of Mr. Muto if they'd like to come forward and speak to us about the proposal.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship. Rosemary Muto on behalf of Joseph Muto, who's present tonight. In a review of...
Rosemary, can you just pull it close to you, that mic?
Yes. Is it recording or amplifying?
That's perfect. Now the people behind you can hear too. Thank you.
Okay, great. To speak to the global, I guess, both applications at once to address the major concern of parking. Originally, the site plan was a conceptual plan. The city was contacted prior to the plans being developed by the designer about access to Shuswap Street. Unfortunately, the design was made and then we were notified of the non-access to Shuswap Street. So that was fine. As you can see in the package is included the design concept, which allowed for 12 parking, which would have fit within the bylaw and did not require variance application. So the parking issue as we see it is a bit moot because we'll have to relook at the concept. It could be that we are able to accommodate the 12 units with 12 parking, and we know in the staff direction that they say we may be able to accommodate it. Underground parking is not an option. It's cost prohibitive, and so it defeats the purpose of what's the intention for that development from our perspective. So if we're unable to have the 12 parking, we anticipate we would have to have a variance application. So we see that as moot at this time and would like to express that, of course, we would work with the city within the zoning requirements to try and fit in the 12 parking spaces and the 10 units. But if that's not possible, then back to the drawing board. At this point, without knowing if we're part of the official community plan or the rezoning, there's no point in going toward the drawings and having that extra expense at this point, knowing that we could apply for a variance on parking if we needed to.
Understood. Council, do you have any questions regarding this OCP amendment? Seeing none right now, thank you very much. So for members of the gallery, the OCP amendment and the zoning amendment are sort of closely linked. So this is the OCP hearing, but understand if submissions cross over. I would ask for a first time if there's any member of the public who would like to come and speak towards this OCP amendment. Please come forward.
Your Worship, the Mayor and City Council members. My name is Nicholas Young. I represent St. John's Anglican Church. At the outset, I want to say that St. John's is not opposed to the proposed development. There are, however, a number of concerns, and I presume this is the time to bring them up. And these concerns have been raised by the Church Council. The church has a large parking lot that is used throughout the week. As there is no access on Shuswap Street, there is concern that the parking lot will be used by tenants of the project. I'm not saying that it will be, but as I say, it is just concerns. Another concern is that the lot will be used during construction of the project. Maybe that can be avoided, but this is just a concern that was brought up by the council. Drainage. During spring runoff and heavy rains, there is some flooding in the church basement. So the church council hopes that the drainage from the project will be directed well away from the church property. And thirdly, snow ploughing, and I presume this is for the council to consider. It is hoped that the church parking lot will not be used as a snow dump during the winter when the laneway is ploughed. The laneway, as you know, is very narrow. And I think there is another apartment block down there towards Barley Station. And with this development now, there is going to have to be snow removal in that laneway. And because the church parking lot is large, once again, I say it most probably won't happen, but the church council is concerned. And that is about all that I've been asked to do. So I'm just saying that this is what people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Young. Appreciate you bringing those concerns forward. I'll just see if there's any questions for you from council. Does the council have any questions for Mr. Young at this time? Okay, thank you very much. I'll ask for a second time if there's people who'd like to come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Doug Revel. I live at number 40, 2nd Avenue Southeast. My wife is in the gallery as well.
Welcome to council.
Let me first start off by saying I had a question for Councillor Lavray last night. He answered my question regarding the rezoning signage, so I very much appreciate that. And when my wife read about this development in the paper, I shared my concerns with someone from staff and they got right back to me, so I very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak in front of you. Second of all, I'm not against development. I think development is a good thing, but I do have some concerns regarding this potential idea. The Moodos might be able to answer my question, but my first concern is they would like to put 3 structures on this site, and I don't know if that would be the correct usage of the lot. And so when I look at the plan that's there, and I've paced out the potential structures, I just don't see 3 structures on that lot. Why does it need to be 3 structures? Why can't it be an apartment or 1 fourplex and 1 duplex, or 2 fourplexes? But why three structures?
Okay, thank you for that question.
Since there will be no access from Shoestop Street, it means that the back lane, which is used a fair amount, it will be used significantly more. Will the back lane get an upgrade? Because it will mean more traffic is going on it. And my third concern is parking at times is already a concern. And we're now no longer in the day of a 1-car family. There are a number of places where there are multiple cars. My wife and I, for example, each have a car, and we live in a 630 square foot home. We park one on our driveway and one on the street. Now, looking at this, it's 10 units, and I'm not saying that there will be 2 people per unit, but there could be. That equals 20 cars, potentially. Now, since parking at times is an issue, where will everyone park? Because, as Mr. Young said, presumably there will be no parking in the church parking lot. That means people may have to park on First Street Southeast and 2nd Avenue Southeast. So those are my main concerns, and I agree with Councillor Flynn and you, Mayor Harrison, that the idea of high density development is a great thing in the September 7th and the September 12th newspaper articles, but those are just some of my concerns. And I thank you all for listening and considering my concerns.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Revel, for bringing those forward. I'll just see if councillors have any questions at this time. Council, any questions for Mr. Revel at this time? Okay, thank you for your input. I'll ask again for a second time if there's further members of the public who would like to come forward and provide input to this OCP amendment. Please come forward.
Good evening, Council. My name is Jeff Sawatsky. I'm at 41 First Street Southeast.
Welcome to council, Mr. Sawatsky.
Pardon me?
Welcome to council.
Thank you. I currently use that lane that's in question, that the parking is going to be on. That lane is not wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass. And my concern is that lane going to be upgraded so that 2 vehicles can pass? If it is upgraded, I believe that would be eliminating some of the parking on that proposal. So I'd be a little concerned about it. With that many more vehicles there, you would want to pass vehicles on that lane.
Understand. We will get clarification for you about your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask again if there's members of the public who would like to provide input. I'll ask for a third time. This is on the OCP piece of this application. Council, do you have any questions for any of the presenters at this time? Seeing none, I'll close the official community plan amendment application, and we'll go to number 2, the zoning amended application, number 1153, Mutual Holdings Limited. We'll have the Director of Engineering or Development Services explain the rezoning application to us.
Bylaw number 4347 proposes to rezone Lot 2, Plan 28506, 130 Shuswap Street Southwest from P3 Institutional to R5 High Density Residential. The owner and applicant is the same as the OCP amendment proposal, Muto Holdings Limited.
Thank you very much. And for members of the audience, this is the same piece of property. Zoning cannot happen unless the official community plan amendment is made. That's why they're in this order. Ms. Muto, did you wish to speak to the zoning amendment application at all? Okay. I'll ask members of the public, is there anything that you would like to add to this rezoning application? Please come forward. Is there something that you'd like to add? You have to come to the microphone.
I just
Great.
have
Name and residential address.
So my name's Doug Revel.
It's
I'm
still
at
Doug
number 40
Revel.
2nd Avenue Southeast.
Thank you, Doug.
I forgot to mention, and I don't know if this is the right place to ask this question. This potential development, will it be rentals or will it be sales?
Okay, we can ask that question at another time. We'll make sure before we close the hearing we ask it.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there further input from members of the public for a second time? Okay, just before I close the hearing then, Ms. Muto, this is our opportunity to ask you a question. I would like to ask Mr. Revel's question because we can't ask it of you later. We can ask staff questions. Mr. Revel's question was, would it be rental or purchase, or do you know at this time?
We don't know at this time. We're leaning toward rentals.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any further input to this rezoning application? Okay, I'll close this hearing and we'll go on to 22.3, zoning amendment application number 1156, Nova Capital, McDermott, 870 10th Street Northeast, R1 to R8. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the proposal.
Zoning amendment bylaw number 4351 proposes to rezone Lot A, Plan 10397 from R1 Single Family Residential to R8 Residential Suite Zone for the property addressed at 870 10th Street Northeast. Present use is a single family dwelling. The proposed use is single family dwelling with secondary and or detached suites. The owner is Nova Capital Limited and the applicant is Ian McDermott.
Great, thank you. I'll just let members of the gallery know we will be dealing with all of these applications after we close the hearing, including the first two we just heard. I see Mr. McDermott's in the audience. Mr. McDermott, do you have anything you'd like to add to the director's report?
No.
Okay, thank you. Is there other people who would like to come forward and make presentation about this rezoning? I'll ask for a first time. Asking for a second time. Council, do you have any questions of the applicant? Seeing none, I'll ask for a third and final time. Seeing no speakers, I will close that piece of the hearing and we'll go to 22.4, zoning amendment application number 1158. Larson, 531 5th Street Southeast, R1 to R8. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the proposal.
Zoning amendment bylaw number 4355 proposes to rezone Lot 1, Plan EPP 86105 from R1 Single Family Residential to R8 Residential Suite Zone for the property fronting 531 5th Street Southeast. The owner and applicant is Mr. and Mrs. Larson.
Great, thank you very much. Are the applicants in the audience? Did you wish to come forward and add anything?
Nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask if there's any members of the public who would like to speak to this rezoning. I'll ask for a second time. Council, do you have any questions for the applicant? I'll ask for a third and final time if there's any input to this rezoning application. Seeing none, I'll close the zoning hearing and we'll go to section 23, reconsideration of bylaws. So the first bylaw is 23.1, City of Salmon Arm Fishing Community Plan Amendment Bylaw, number 4345, Muto Holdings, 130 Shishwap Street Southwest. The OCP amendment is from institutional to high density. Third reading. There's a motion proposed. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that motion to get it on the floor? Councillor Cannon, Councillor Flynn, thank you. Speakers to the motion. Councillor Flynn.
Just a question for staff, Your Worship, through you to the Director of Development Services. This is an OCP amendment and then the next one is a zoning amendment. Form and character and the development, what it looks like and parking and any other future variances, those are, if we approve the zoning and the OCP amendment, then it's up to you to approve the plan and within guidelines, and if there's any variances needed for parking or anything, that would come to us at that point. Is that correct?
Director of Development Services.
What Councillor Flynn said is correct.
Thank you.
So we are just deciding on land use and OCP designation.
That's correct. Changing the designation from institutional to high-density residential.
Thank you. I support this. Councillor
Lindgren.
Thank you, Your Worship. I also support the change of the OCP. I do have some questions, and that was Councillor Flynn's was one of them. We have no say then in the design, which concerns me because I have some concerns about the lack of outdoor space, possible variances on parking in a congested downtown area, young families. I don't see anything that indicates how big these units are, if they're bachelor suites or two-bedroom units, and what kind of outdoor space do we need for that sort of demographic?
Those are good questions, Councillor Lindgren. I'm wondering if we can just save them for the zoning piece.
Sure.
If we just look after the OCP piece, and then we'll talk about the zoning, and I'll certainly allow you to have your questions at that time.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you very much. Further questions on the OCP amendment to high density from institutional, or comments from council? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll support the OCP. It's hard not to talk about the two of them, but I'll support the OCP change. I think that it changes the designation to high density that fits the character and what we have in place on the map, and it is different than an actual application coming forward, so I will support it.
Thank you. Further comments from council? Can we just see the picture of the OCP map up there? So, for members of the gallery, this is the official community plan map. Pink is the commercial area. Orange is the residential high density, and purple is the institutional. And as you note, the institutional purple are churches in this area. Surrounded by high density, and so when churches sell their properties to developers, it's natural that the developer would want to, they would come and look at the official community plan and see what the surrounding suggestion was. So certainly the suggestion for high density development in this area is where we want it, because all the amenities are there and people can walk places. So I too will support the OCP amendment. Is there any other speakers to the OCP amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Now we'll go to the zoning piece. We'll have a motion on the screen. Councillor Wallace-Richmond, Councillor Flynn, moved and seconded. Councillor Flynn, you wish to speak to the zoning?
Just again, my question, when we deal with the zoning, we are making it R5, which is high density or medium density, high. And we are not dealing with form and character, number of units, parking, or any of that at this point. That mocked up design, which wouldn't be approved by staff because it has an entrance off of Shuswap, isn't the plan. That is the next stage once it's zoned appropriately. Is that correct?
Director of Development Services.
Your Worship, if the property is rezoned to R5 for high density land use and development, then based on the parcel size, potentially 10 units, I won't say 10 units could fit, but a maximum of 10 units would be permitted. And the site plan attached in the staff report was done up before the applicant was aware that there would be no access allowed off of Shuswap Street. So in fairness, the applicant was not aware of that until after they applied. So now they know, and they do have to come back. So when I said Councillor Flynn was correct in everything he said, except for the fact that development permit does have to come back to council for consideration. And if the development permit proposal meets the guidelines of the OCP, then council must approve it.
Okay. So tonight isn't necessarily where we deal with parking, form and character, all of that. That's later.
Yes.
Director of Development Services.
That's at the development permit stage.
Okay, thank you. I will support the rezoning. It completely makes sense. This is the right part of town to go higher density, and I am very much in favor of it.
Thank you. Councillor Cannon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too will support the zoning. I think this is a perfect fit, and I look forward to when it comes back to council of the design.
Thank you. Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll support the zoning as well. When variances come in front of us, we're not predisposed to any decision. I mean, it's our responsibility to look at things fairly and closely consider all options. But I guess for my own part, I would signal that just based on the discussion, and I know it's a high concept plan right now, and it's going to be hard, I think, to develop this property, but in this area, given the constraints of Shuswap, the lane, and parking, I would be scrutinizing any potential variance very closely in terms of my lens that I bring to it. But I will support the zoning at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Further speakers on this rezoning? just before I call the question then, we will get it back as a development permit. So for the members of the gallery, once a zoning is done, if the developer meets all of the zoning regulations, parking, setbacks, snow removal from their site, all of those things, then they do not require a variance. And it doesn't come back to council except for the development permit, which basically is what the building looks like. So there was a couple of good questions, I thought. The laneway that runs behind this proposal, one of the speakers was worried that this development would have parking on the lane. Can I just ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works, the design of this building, what is the setback from the laneway that building or parking must be?
Your Worship, I can answer that.
Or
if you
sorry,
don't
it's
mind.
Director of Development Services, yeah.
So there would be a 5 meter building setback for buildings from the lane, and a 5 meter setback from the front parcel line. As you can see on the air photo, there's another high density development, 2 lots to the north with access from the lane.
And as far as parking, cars from this development would not be allowed to park on the lane. They would have to park on their property.
Right, that was your question too. No, they cannot park on the lane.
Okay, thank you. Can we just talk about snow removal a little bit? There was a couple of concerns about snow removal. That lane is a city street, and so we're responsible for removing the snow there. Director of Engineering and Public Works.
That's correct.
Okay. And if that means moving the snow and moving it away in some way, then plowing it somewhere, we certainly won't plow it onto someone's parking lot. We're not allowed to do that. Okay. Speaking to the rezoning then, this certainly is the right zoning for this area. And like Councillor Lavery, I look forward to having a development permit without any variances. It's a tight package for sure. And so, well, we're only at a schematic stage of a couple of people commented about number of buildings. The number of buildings really is the option of the developer, but they have to meet all the setbacks. So Director of Development Services is 5 meters from the front and back. What's the side setback in high density?
2.4 meters from this north side and 2.4 meters from this north side. If there's any road widening needed along Shuswap Street or the lane, if the lane has to be widened out in any way, then the setback is taken from the ultimate property line. And the lane would need to be upgraded to the lane standard along the frontage there.
Okay. As far as drainage goes, it's another question. They'll hook up to the storm drain there.
They would have to control drainage on site with a stormwater management plan and likely connect into the storm main along Shuswap Street.
Can I just ask one more question about the zoning, just so that the public's aware? Number of parking spaces, if there's, say, 12 units, what's the bylaw say about parking spaces?
12.
Or you can pick your number.
Okay, so the zone would allow 10 units on a parcel this size. So 10 times 1.25 is 11.25, and you round up to 12, so 12 stalls.
So they would have to meet the zoning bylaw as far as parking stalls go. All right, so hearing all of those things, I will vote in favor of the rezoning. It's the right zone, and I think neighbors can be assured that the development will come back at the development variance stage or at the development permit stage, and if there are variances requested, then there will be a public hearing much like this one. Any other councillors wish to speak to this? Call the question, and all those in favor? It's carried unanimously. City of Salmon zoning amendment bylaw number 4351. McDermott, I have a motion on the motion. Someone like to move and second it? Councillor Wallace-Richmond. Second, Councillor Cannon. Council, anyone wish to speak to this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And the final one, 23-4, City of Salmon Arm Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 4355. Have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Lindgren, Councillor Lavery, thank you. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, gallery. This is our question and answer period. If you have a question that you'd like to ask us that's not about any of these zonings, because we can't talk to you about them right now, please come forward and we'll do our best to answer your question. I see no questions, so we have an adjournment motion.
Moved by Councillor Flynn, seconded by Councillor Lindgren, that the regular council meeting of October 28th, 2019 be adjourned.
All those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you, staff. Thank you, public.